Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love applause. I love it. I love it.
There'll be lots of applause. So Todd is going to help us with making sure that we ignite our business, make sure that we ignite our teams, and make sure that we're igniting ourselves. So thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Amy. First of all, I want to start by saying I'm just absolutely giddy to be here. I don't use the word giddy often. I was going to say thrilled, but for a couple of reasons. First of all, how many of you are in from out of town? Raise your hands. Like almost everyone, right? I'm not. This is the first time ever, and I do a lot of this. I actually got to roll out of my open bed this morning, drive down leisurely. But this is why I'm here today. Oh, the second reason, I almost forgot. I do this often. I'm on stages all over the country, all over the world, and I'm listening to Kathy earlier today, and I'm thinking, how many times do I get to go on stage where we're actually doing something real? We're not selling widgets and gadgets. We're not talking about things that just say how to make more money. Well, that's part of it, but look at the impact. She's talking about reducing teenage suicide. That's real. We're here to do something real, and this is what I want to talk about today, because even as I look around and I see all these t-shirts, the freedom to be you, this is real. This is heartfelt stuff. So I'm sitting back there, I'm looking through the room and I'm thinking, okay, I know some of you are here for this reason. I know some of you are here for that reason. Maybe you're here because you want to grow your business. Maybe you're here because you're sent here on behalf of your organization and you're trying to figure out better teamwork, better culture. Maybe you're here for personal reasons. And I'm sitting back there and I'm thinking, I didn't ask myself this question. Why am I here? Obviously, I was invited here, so that's nice. I'll show up. It's fun. It's local. I get to roll out of bed. But then I started thinking, wait a second. This conference is called Ignite, right? And I can come up here and Amy's right, I can tell stories about just about everything. I'm also a researcher, so I could relay data. I could overload all of you with data, and you'd be like, stop, make him stop. But I realized sitting back there, my reason for being here is to ignite you so that you can ignite others, ignite your own business, maybe even ignite yourself. I've been blessed in my career to work with some of the world's biggest CEOs, side by side. I've been in boardrooms where I'm often sitting there saying, why am I here? Why do I get to be in this room? I've sat next to the thought leaders, the biggest best-selling business leaders. I've worked with political figures, whether I agree with them or not, on how they get elected. I've been blessed to sit by these most inspiring people, or at least that's how we often view them. And I was just asked a couple of weeks ago by a woman, and she said, if you were to look at everyone you've ever met, these thousands of people that I've interviewed, celebrities and politicians and business leaders, who is the most inspiring? I said, well, that's a really good question. And the irony of that question is that the only person coming to my mind has probably the least inspiring resume you've ever seen. The person who's ignited me the most in my career actually, on paper, doesn't seem very inspiring at all. And I'm going to introduce you to him. Nobody knows him. I barely knew him. The guy on the right hand of the slide, his name is Stanley Pear, and that's Stanley standing with my wife. This was at a wedding reception party just after we were married, almost 20 years ago in January. Thank you. Stanley doesn't have an impressive resume. Stanley was my mom's cousin. I didn't know Stanley growing up. He wasn't really part of the family. But I had heard stories about Stanley and his family. I had heard stories about how Stanley's mother suffered from mental illness, extreme mental illness. His brother was also mentally ill and also suffered from extreme addiction problems. So I'd hear these stories about this family that's my mom's cousin, and don't really know him. But Stanley had dreams just like we all do. He wanted to become successful, grow a business, fall in love, maybe start a family. And he had all that going for him as a young man. He started a construction company. He dated. And then Stanley's dad died. When Stanley's dad died, Stanley gave up everything to take care of his mother and brother. And he did this for a period of 25 years, living off the state of Minnesota. No resume. We never saw him. When his mother and brother died, this is when I first met Stanley, because Stanley had no other family. So he started showing up to my parents' house. I was in my late teens, early 20s. Every Easter he'd show up. He was a nice guy. But he also kind of reminded me of like that guy in like the children's movie that like lives on the corner and all the kids are scared that they're going to hit the baseball accidentally into his lot. Because he's just a little off. Stanley was that guy. And I've always been a writer, and so I would always tell my mom, I'm like, there's something fascinating about this guy. Someday I'm going to write about Stanley. Someday. She's like, you should interview him. He'd be thrilled. I never got around to it. Now I'm in my mid-20s. I'm now living in Arizona. I'm at work. I had become an awarded writer already. I was in advertising, creative director of advertising agencies. I'm writing all this stuff. I'm winning awards. I'm moving up the ladder, and I can't move fast enough. This is when I'm writing for these politicians, and I'm blah, 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 and I can't move fast enough. So I get a phone call at my office one day. It's my mom, and she says, how are you doing? And I was like, oh, my boss is driving me crazy. I want to do this. She wants me to slow down. Ugh, what do I do? And she goes, well, Stanley's dead. I was like, oh, well, that's too bad I never got to interview him. How selfish is that? She says, yeah. She says, well, in fact, he named my mom the executor of his will, which we all thought was odd because they didn't seem to know each other that well. And I was like, oh. And she goes, we're actually at his house right now. We want to clear out his refrigerator and get his cupboards clear because, no, we don't want rats and stuff, but it's really weird. I said, what's weird? Because nobody had ever been to his house. She goes, he's got engine parts on the table and scraps of woods in the corners and all this weird kind of stuff like most people don't have in their homes. And I said, oh. And I said, so what do I do about my boss? And she goes, well, here's the weirdest part. I said, what's that? And she goes, in the cabinets, between the mattresses, everywhere we look, we're finding these letters. I'm like, what do you mean letters? What do they say? She goes, some of them are just about his day. Some of them are about what, he's thinking about what it would be like if he were Elvis. Random stuff. And some of them are very deep and dark. I probably should have never been born. Inspiring story, right? I said, well, you called them letters. To whom? She said, well, that's the strangest thing. Every single letter starts with the salutation, dear reader. I said, wow. So he was writing to anyone who would take the time to read him. She says, yeah. I said, can you send them to me? And she says, sure. As we clean out his house, I'll pack them up and send them to you. So I'm expecting a manila envelope. These boxes are this big. It's more than 3,000 letters spanning a 15-year period. As a writer, I'm thinking, this is a gift or my biggest curse, because now I got to go through all these. And I did. And after reading through every single letter and being a creative guy, I couldn't figure out what to do with them. So I put them back in the box, I shoved them up in a corner, and I went back to writing. I went back to trying to sell stuff. I've been back to trying to pitch stuff to the world. I've sold more crap to more people than you can imagine. I was good at it. And one night I'm really frustrated with some projects I was working on. This was years after I'd shoved these letters away. And I thought, maybe I need to revisit this because there's got to be something in this Stanley story So I pull the boxes back down, reading through them. He's talking about how the calendar hangs weird on the wall. I'm like, I can't use that. That's not interesting. Till I reached this letter. Dear reader, it came to me today, 4:30 p.m., that I did my mission in life, or I remained alive long enough so my mother and brother left before I did. So now I can end with the century that is about to end. I'll try to last until 2000 arrives, since my grandma told me that I had a chance to see 2000. Look at that last line. After that, ... He served his purpose. Now, this may seem like a very, very sad story for Stanley, but it also hit me so deep because I realized I wasn't being real. I was looking just for dollars. I'd say anything. I can make up stories all day long. I can write that will blow your mind. But I didn't care about what I was doing. I didn't care about the change I was creating. And so when we're here today talking about doing something real in the world, yeah, you may have come here because you want to grow your business, and that's great. We all have to grow business, right? But I also want you to think about the impact, the real stuff. What does it mean to ignite? You can talk about car ignition, spark, chemical reaction, something changes. Ignition is usually viewed when we talk about ignite, it's usually viewed in a positive sense, right? But it could be negative. Think about your least favorite boss in your life that was so offensive to you that you're like, they created a change that changed you in a positive way. Because not only did you realize, I never want to be like that person, right? There are negative things that can ignite people. There are stories like Stanley, which is really sad. This is the first time I've ever publicly shared that story, by the way. Because I didn't know what to do with it. What does it mean to ignite? And how do we ignite business, ignite team members, ignite customers, family members? How do we make that change? And often, a lot of us in the world don't believe that we're big enough to do that. We don't believe our words will have the kind of impact that will change somebody, change their mind. But I want you to think about this. This is one of my favorite photos. Beautiful, right? Kinda. Maybe a little bit. This is Death Valley, California. So beautiful that it has the word death in its name. Right? Like the reason it has death in its name is because no one believes anything can live there. When we're talking about Ignite, I want to show you something that happened in 2016. It's called a Wildflower Super Bloom. More than 5,000 square miles of Death Valley looked exactly like this. What happened to a place that is supposedly dead? The seeds are obviously under there. Right amount of water, right amount of sunshine, perfect amount of heat. This lasted for a couple days. People came from all over the world and then went back to just being dead. So when we think about people, when we think about whether it's customers, employees, team members, family members, children, where are those seeds that are waiting to ignite? And how do we get to them? How do we pull the perfect elements together, the perfect words, whatever tools we have, perfect assessment to get them to ignite? This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite authors. Has anybody read Think and Grow Rich? Right? It's a very simple book. It's kind of like an entrepreneurial Bible, start-off Bible, I would say. The starting place of all achievement is desire. Now, that's a very simple sentence, and we can analyze the tar out of it because that sentence is missing in often a lot of the conversations we have when we're talking about performance in corporations. We're talking about getting people motivated. Because we forget to ask them, what do you want? Think about back to your own life. Elementary school, for example. Go back to elementary school for a second and think about the kids in the classrooms and the teachers in the playground. Try to remember one person that reached out and recognized or appreciated you for a talent or skill or some ability you had. Now go into middle school, high school. Maybe now your audience expands a little bit. Maybe now it's a significant other. Somebody really likes you, thinks you're the bomb because you're funny, you're kind, or whatever. And go into your first jobs and think about, I guarantee you I could go through this room and all of you would have stories. And not only that, all of you would have stories where you almost remember everything about that conversation when somebody called you out for something great. Now, many people say nice things, right? But for some reason, you remember the words of Mrs. Kennedy in the second grade because it made you feel so good. Why? Because she connected with this, the desire. Something inside of you that says, I want to be this. I want to do that. So you're striving for it, and this is one of the only people that recognizes it. So again, why are we here? This is one of the, seriously, this is one of those really ridiculously simple questions until you actually step back and start to really ask yourself, like, what is my purpose? And my purpose today is to make you think about every breakout session you're going to go to, every speaker you're going to hear, every conversation you have with each other, and look for those things that you're going to go home with, wherever it may be, and say, this is something real, and with this I can make change. Maybe you're just here because it's Scottsdale in October. Maybe you're just here to, get away from your kids or just take a break. But as you go through this conference, these sessions, think about this. Why am I really here? Well, I think I can clump all of you into three groups. Many of you are here to ignite your business. You want to grow it. You want to find out new avenues, find new customers. Many of you are here to ignite your team. You're trying to build culture or create better relationships, help people understand each other better. And then there's this group, Ignite Yourself. Let's start first with Ignite Your Business. Because oftentimes when you travel and you spend money to travel and you spend money to go to conferences and you spend money to learn, it's a business. I have to do it for my business because the business needs it and it needs to grow, and this is great. But let's not forget about the what's real part. I have a good story. So I grew up in radio. Sorry if I go into that radio voice, because back in the day, everyone was throwing up into the microphone when they talked on the radio. That's how we all sounded. Now, when I was 15, I sent letters to 27 local radio stations in my hometown. 27. I said, I'll do anything. I'll change light bulbs. I'll take out trash. I just want to be around this because I flipped a burger once and I did not want to flip another. So I did it all through high school. I was on the air. I worked almost full time all the way through high school and college. Radio took me through college. Took me beyond college. I went to big markets. I became a semi-radio celebrity, whatever. My wife worked in TV. So we'd travel across the country, moving from market to market. It was all fun and games until we ended up in a small town in Idaho where she was the main anchor. I walked into the local radio station and I said, I'm here. Do you have a job? And the guy said, I'd love to hire you, but this is all I can afford to pay you. I was like, I can't live off that. So he said, if you want more money, he goes, have you ever tried sales? I said, well, I can talk all day long. I can do this. So he said, sure, sign me up. So I drove around this small town in Idaho where I didn't know anybody, I didn't know any of the businesses, and I walked in and I tried to sell. And my station manager was like, this is how you sell. And have you closed anything today? And I was like, man, I'm bad at this. I was so bad, I sold nothing. Seriously, 2 months. Not only did I sell nothing, the clients that I was just supposed to service and like say hi, they were reducing their radio buy. This is how bad I was. Because my mind was so focused on, gotta sell. I can do this. I know this product. At that point in my life, I'd probably been in radio for already like 11 years because I started so young. So I'm frustrated. I start sending out resumes like other things I can do. And I finally get offered a job as a creative director at an ad agency, a big ad agency in town. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Now I can stop this whole selling nonsense. So I go into my station manager and I'm like, here's my 2 weeks just to be nice, but who's going to keep a sales guy who hasn't sold a thing on for an extra 2 weeks? I'm thinking, I'm done today. Nope. He says, I need you to stick around. I said, for what? He says, my morning show team is going on vacation for 3 days in like 2.5 weeks, so I want you to fill in. So I'm like, so what am I supposed to do for the next 2 weeks? He says, I don't know. Go try and sell something. So I'm like, what do I do? And so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to everyone I've talked to already. And instead of trying to sell them something, I'm going to be honest. So I went out to the mom and pop gas station and I said, hey, I told you should invest all your marketing dollars in my radio station. Let's not do that. What I think you should do is I think you should buy billboards over here and internet marketing over here. And if you do go on radio, it's not only my station, but you got to hit this station too. And the way you spend your money properly at radio is to do live remotes, blah, 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 blah. In the next 2 weeks, I broke the record for sales at that radio station. Broke the all-time record. Station manager was like, what'd you do? Like, I was honest. I changed my perspective. So if you're here to ignite your business, I want you to think about this. First, change your perception. Because my perception was a slight shift from I need to sell to I'm going to be real. I'm going to tell you what I honestly believe I think is going to help you. And in doing so, I changed the customer's perception. Think about what they were thinking when I walked back through the door and said, yeah, I told you that, but I was all of a sudden a partner with them, not a sales guy. I wasn't trying to get money. And finally, connect for their benefit. This is often one of the most overlooked points of business. And now as I'm older, much older, and do this for a living, I consult with a lot of companies as well and have through the years. This is often the number one thing people think. You've heard of the what's in it for me? This is how I sell books. Is when a book's on a stand, I have to have a title that says, what's in it for the reader? They have to walk up and say, what's in it for me? But when you're in business, you have to think, what's in it for you? Because that's all people care about. If you're here to ignite people, this is probably what I speak most about traveling through the country. I work for a company called O.C. Tanner, which is the largest employee recognition company in the world. It's about 90 years old. We sell recognition programs to the biggest companies. For our last book, which is titled Appreciate, we did global research, and we wanted to find out what inspires people to produce great work. So we asked the question, asked employees the question, what could you or your boss do to inspire you to produce great work? Seems like a pretty simple question. And before I give you the reveal, think of what's coming to your head. What do you think inspires people the most to produce great work? Anybody? To be acknowledged. These are our results. Now, obviously, you're staring at that big, and you know the title of my book, so it's probably pretty obvious. But when I approach people in other settings, and don't tell them what I do, usually the answers they give me are down here in the gray section. Promote me. They want a promotion. Hey, if you give me a bigger title, then I'll work harder. Until then, I'm not doing anything. 6% actually, those that said train me, that makes sense to me. If you want me to produce great work, teach me how to do it. Teach me what you expect. Teach me your definition of great. That makes a lot of sense to me. Only 7% said pay me more. When I have just loose conversations, this is by far the number one people think. Managers think this is the number one answer. This blue section here, this starts to make a lot more sense, inspire me. I want to be wound up about what I'm doing. I want to be motivated by what I'm doing. 12% give me autonomy. I'm fascinated by this answer because in organizations a lot, managers, hiring managers, recruiters, they go out and they find rock stars. Looking at the resume, this is the person that's going to change everything. You're hired. Person comes through the door. Person's like, I'm going to change everything. Manager goes, no, here's how we do it. We don't let people do what we hired them to do. What they're truly great at. 13%, nothing, I'm self-motivated. Now, it's probably not good practice for me to disagree with my own company's research. I don't buy this. Self-motivated. Now, maybe people aren't motivated by their manager or their organization, but they're motivated by someone. Could be family members, could be customers. Me, I write for Forbes and Inc. every week. I write these books, I give these speeches. I'm motivated more by an audience than anything else. And finally, this 37% said, the number one thing you can do is recognize me. When you talk to millennials about this, that number goes up to 41%. So it's growing. Recognition is becoming more and more important. So if you want to ignite people, if you're here today to say, I need to figure out how to make my team click, or I'm sent here because I'm focused on building corporate culture. First, listen. That's one word that we look at it and we go, I knew that. How often do we actually do it, though, when you're talking about employees, team members? We think we know what they'd want, but we haven't asked them. When you actually listen, you'll actually learn. I could tell you so many stories about this, but I don't have time about actually learning what people are telling you they want. And if you do these things, if you listen and learn and then recognize, you'll light them up. If you're here to ignite yourself, I struggled with this a little bit because this conversation could go in every direction imaginable, and I tried to think of stories that I could tell from notable figures and whatnot. And I thought of a few about our own personal motivations and drives. What ignites you? Many of us are too humble to honestly answer that question because we think it should be something that society is telling us. We can say success, money, but sometimes it's a lot more personal than that. So I tried to think of stories about what could I share that truly communicates how different we all are. Now, this might be the dumbest story you've ever heard, but I guarantee it's going to make you smile. This is my kitchen. It was remodeled about 5 years ago. During the remodel, my wife and I lost our golden retriever. It was he was only 6 years old, and we were really sad. And I was crushed. It was the first time in my life I'd ever felt heartbreak, and I know that's really not saying a lot about my loss in life, but he crushed me. He absolutely crushed me. He was my best friend. He went everywhere with me. We lost him. He was perfectly behaved. My wife says, we'll wait a year, and we'll get another one. So I'm like, okay. So I get another golden retriever. Unlike my first golden retriever, who was perfectly behaved, the next one is horrible. And we are smart enough to get him right after we completely gut and rebuild my kitchen. So he chews up the baseboards. He chews up the walls. He chews up the stools. He chewed a hole in the wood floor in front of my refrigerator. Why? He chewed the hair off my wife's Pomeranian. So we've got this little black Pomeranian with a little curly tail. No, it looks like a little baboon. So here's where we get smarter. He's trouble. How do we fix this? Well, we can train him, or we can go get another one for him to pick on. So a year later, we got his little sister. Now here's where I want to show you. The little sister shows up. She is sweet as can be. She follows him around. She wants to copy everything he's doing, but she doesn't have the power to actually destroy stuff yet. But she's so sweet, so well behaved, and he's crazy. So one morning I wake up and walk out into my kitchen. He found the sprinklers going through my shrubs in the backyard. Totally ripped up all the hoses. He's having a ball. But look at it. She's perfectly clean. There were mud prints up on my refrigerator and every cabinet. She's perfectly clean. Although she followed him everywhere else, that wasn't her gig. She stayed out of it. And this just goes to explain how they're siblings. They're the same breed. They often act the exact same way. But we all have different things that motivate them. He's obviously motivated by mud. Look at how happy he is, though. So if you're here to ignite yourself, first be at peace with yourself. This is what all these t-shirts say. Be okay with, I like the mud. Or, mud's not my thing. Secondly, I always tell people to pick a race. When they say, hey, I'm just feeling like I'm in a slump. You ever sign up for a marathon? Anybody? There we go. The day you sign up for a marathon, what happens? You regret? Well, I'm serious, because it's months out. You sign up for a marathon, all of a sudden you go, well, I better start running. Because that day is going to come, and if I don't run up until then, 26.2 miles is going to hurt. I've done that before. It hurt. And the final point here is I want to go a little bit deeper on this, because we often talk about putting ourselves into someone else's shoes. We talk about understanding people based on their profiles. But I want you to think about how deep this really goes. I want to tell you a story. This is in San Francisco. Is anybody in from San Francisco? So this building, it's a beautiful building. It sits on a stretch of the waterway called the Embarcadero. If you head right down the street that way, you're going to bump into Giant Stadium. If you head right down the street that way, you're going to bump into the wharf. Beautiful. And if you were to walk by this, you'd think these are high-end condos of very wealthy people living overlooking the water. This is actually a halfway house. It's not just a halfway house. It actually serves as a correctional facility. Felons are serving time here. It's Delancey Street. Yeah. So it's been around since 1978. It's created by a woman named Mimi Silbert, who was a professor at Berkeley in criminology. She saw how wrong the prison systems were working, so she developed this. She raised her children in a halfway house with convicted criminals. Now, the interesting thing, I could tell you so many stories about this place, but the interesting thing about this, the quick interesting thing, is that there's one employee. It's the founder. Everything else, security, everything, administration, everything, is run by residents. And the success rate is huge. So my co-author and I are in San Francisco, and we end up here. We didn't even know we were next to it. And like, hey, it's a restaurant. Let's go in there and eat. So we start talking to the servers, who are all residents. Like, this is great. All of a sudden, they start telling us the Delancey Street story about how it was founded. And we're like, wait, this whole block is a halfway house? Correctional facility? And our server's like, yeah. So my co-author and I were like, let's go ring the doorbell. We're curious cats. So we go down there, and they let us in. They give us a tour, and we're like, we write for this, and we write for that. And they give us a tour, and it's great. End of the tour, they say, hey, our founder is here, and she wants to meet you. So go back to the restaurant. She'll meet you for lunch. So we do, and we're waiting. In walks Mimi. She's a tiny little spitfire of a woman. Bright red hair, on fire, talking to all of the residents as she sits down. So I was like, tell me your story. Her parents were of European Jewish descent, came over, moved to Boston and New York, a street called Delancey Street. This is where the name comes from. She starts this. She tells me about how she raises her kids in there. She tells me about the process, and we're sitting there for a long time. And I said, do you have any story that kind of haunts you, that really just sticks with you, about why you're here, what makes this work? Her success rate is phenomenal, by the way. She says, yeah. She goes, I don't know if I know exactly what you're asking, Todd, but I do remember one gentleman who came in, and Mimi tries to meet every resident within the first 2 weeks they're there. So the gentleman comes in, and she walks into a room with him, and she talks about the process at Delancey Street, that he's going to get an education. He's going to get a job. He's going to start at the bottom in the cleaning crew. You're going to work for 11 hours a day. She says, the gentleman won't look up at me. He sits there like this, totally closed off. She said, I keep talking, and he still won't look at me. And she finally got so frustrated that she stopped, and she said, listen. She said, this whole process is built on trust. And if you can't look up at me, we're not going to be able to have a relationship. So please, sir, is there a problem? Why won't you look at me? The guy, who apparently was huge, just huge muscle-wise, finally looks up and he says, ma'am, I'm scared. Well, Mimi's like this tall. She's lucky if she's 90 pounds. She says, you're scared of what? He says, ma'am, I'm scared of what you're going to do to me. Mimi says, what could I ever do to you? He says, I'm terrified. She says, why? He uncovers his arms to reveal swastikas. She says, oh. Mimi says, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to do the scariest thing you can ever imagine. I'm going to forgive you. She said the gentleman fell off his chair in tears. Now I want to go back to stepping into somebody's shoes. How many people could understand that this guy is coming from a place of anger? He's coming from a place of fighting. And he doesn't understand somebody looking at him and saying, I forgive you. So why are we here? What are you going to take home? What are you going to learn from all the sessions in these next couple days? Are you going to bring home a little tan? Arizona sun? And I want to finish with this. if you embrace that the things that you can do are limitless, you can put your ding in. You know, this is a great, inspiring quote. But if we want to create something real, if we want to change, it's not just reading the words. We have to be active with this quote because we actually have to believe it. First and hardest step. And that leads us to questions. Anybody? Somebody's got to break the ice. There you go. You want to hear more about Stanley? What, any particular aspect? That's how he saw life. You know, he probably lived for 8 years after his mother and brother both were passed. And he was, at least as he presented himself to us, jovial. Now, the letters don't show jovial, but he did present himself to the world as a happy guy. Yes, right.
And your family as inspirational. They received him at their table.
Oh, for sure.
And your mother was named as the executive of his estate going into his private home. So it's all perception, isn't it? And what people take away from stories and the admiration and inspiration of that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Today.
No, that's a great point because it is all perception, and I've never, when you just said that, it's the first time I ever looked at my parents and went, because I was always fascinated when Stanley would come for like Easter dinner or whatever. He would always ask for the most leftovers to take home. And I kept thinking, well, that's strange. But he made him so happy. And of course, my mom just was like, take whatever you want. Even that Jell-O stuff with the marshmallows. Take it, please. Yes. I have written an article once, but as far as doing it, this is the most I've ever done with them. I have talked to my literary agent, who still thinks there's something there, but it is a very, very difficult, and I'm an innately happy person, so it's often hard for me to read those. And he has a lot of happy letters too, but the ones that go deep, it's really, really difficult. So at some point, they still sit in my closet. Yes?
My question is about, I think that a lot of people in this room do work that has a lot of impact. That's why they're here. Mm-hmm. And when you describe the correctional facility, there's a woman who's doing this work repeatedly that is getting a lot of success, and yet it must be frustrating in a lot of ways to think, okay, here's something that works, how do we scale that? And I think my question is about, in all the successful people that you've interviewed or worked with, what do you think is some of the criteria or the factors that lead to being able to scale impact when you already know you're having it? So kind of related to what we were talking about in the school system, a lot of people here are having impact. How do you scale it?
Well, I'll tell you the secret to Delancey Street is her secret to scalability, and taking these people that could not be hired before this, that were actually menaces to society in many aspects, and turning them into, now they're running this organization. There's like 6 locations throughout the country, that when a new resident comes in, she has a philosophy of each one teach one. So once you make it through the door, and you're there for, I don't know what the dates are, but once you're there for long enough, now it becomes your responsibility to take in the next guy, and then the next guy after that, and the next guy, and so it all builds up underneath you, to where they're scaling this good concept, because this first guy has to get through the hard time first to understand, wait, this is working. I see change. They actually care about me. Does that somewhat answer your question? But, business is business too, and so that's a very big question, and I think it could probably go a lot of different ways. But that whole philosophy of I'm going to build you up so that you can build others up, I think has to be in that equation somewhere. There, back there.
Thank you.
Yes.
When you talk about igniting yourself and those 3 steps, with the put yourself in someone else's shoes, is that so you can help them, just a different perspective? Maybe you have an example as far as when you've used that to ignite yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just put yourself into someone's shoes, because when we can honestly do that, how many of us operate on autopilot often? We all do, right? At certain points. And until somebody kind of jogs like where we are, until we can actually step into someone else's shoes for at least a second, because igniting yourself, when you see the joy on a client's face, for example, like true joy, that you've helped them discover something, there's nothing more powerful, right? I mean, that's the gold. And so, but that's because you're somehow stepping into their shoes for a second and going, wow, I did that for them. And in the process of that, you become ignited. You become on fire. Yes?
I want to say thank you to Dennis for being my arm, first of all. There's a lot of talk in society generally, particularly in business, about mental health and well-being at the moment. And obviously Stanley made a great impact on you in understanding what was going on behind the mirror, basically, the mirror that he showed to the outside world. You're obviously a gifted writer, because otherwise you wouldn't have all those awards and success. Have you ever thought of allowing others to see those by just putting some of the more difficult ones online? Because I find that a lot of people don't get to see other people's cracked mirrors, and sometimes people who are going through those challenges, just understanding that person was able to serve his mother and his family while going through those things, and the impact it made on you as somebody that they potentially would admire or be able to read. Have you ever thought about kind of doing something like that?
I have thought about it, but I love what you're saying right now, because it took me, when I got those letters, I was still too young and I wasn't familiar with that world at all. I mean, it was so foreign to me. But you're right, that putting all of those as someone who lived his entire life with the purpose of helping mentally ill people, and what that felt like for him, would probably benefit a lot of people. That's fantastic thinking. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Anybody else? Okay, that's it.
All right. Everyone give Todd a huge round of applause.